On in, come on in. Come on in. So do you ever see a new technology be released on the market and you're just like, why do we need this? Right? Yeah. I remember a few years ago when Apple announced FaceTime, and I was just like, what are we wasting this for? Like, who's going to do this? And then I had kids, and I got to FaceTime with them a few minutes ago, and honestly, it just re-energized everything. And, you know, when I think about this event, and I think about all of you who made it here, and you get to participate in this energy, I also want to give a shout out to those of you who are watching at home who can't necessarily be in this room, but still want to be a part of this experience, because I've sat through online stuff, and it's sometimes not easy. So big shout out to technology for those of you who are watching. And honestly, there are also some people who we really wanted to hear from who couldn't necessarily be here in person. And our next speaker is one of those, and that's Dr. Stanton Hom. In case you don't know, Dr. Stanton Hom is one of the people who embodies the action of all of the anger and frustration and wanting to protect our rights as parents, as chiropractors, as freedom fighters. And that's exactly what Dr. Stanton does in his practice, on his podcasts, in his life. And it's a really important message in this time of uncertainty and not sure what's coming and what's going to happen, that we have people like Dr. Hom who are on the front edge, leading the way and helping us to do that. So please welcome via Zoom, Dr. Stanton Hom.
Close your eyes. And I'd love for you to feel into the gravitational forces and the radiant forces that essentially allow for us to be part of this vitalistic universe. I want you to feel through your feet, through your seat, the anchoring all the way through the center of the earth, the center of the galaxy, the center of this universe. And I want you to feel through the tallness of your spine and your cranium and the expansiveness of your central nervous system that plasticized 50,000 neural connections per second in utero that transformed 2 half cells to 26 billion cells in roughly 280 days. And there's no opting out of this infinity of divinity, this experience. And while yes, there's a lot of anger and frustration, I want you to visualize Jeannie, and I want you to visualize Dee Dee and BJ, and I want you to visualize every single freaking chiropractor that was arrested for practicing medicine without a license, and recognize that you are an extension of them. And there's no opting out from that, any of what I just shared. And I want you to know that I'm eternally grateful to be able to speak to you guys. And I was telling Justin before, as we were testing, that I don't get FOMO at all, ever. And then as soon as he flipped on the camera, I could weep right now, because I miss like the energy of what the ICPA is and everything that you guys get to experience there in person. And so no segue out of that meditation. Sorry about that, by the way. Okay, so I I apologize that I'm not there. We literally we're in our new home. I was literally trying to start my studio today for our podcast, and all the connectivity, I think all the forces lined up together that I could actually be there with you today. And we're actually in the midst of literally our last day in our office of 8 years is next Friday. So moving our home of 17 years and moving our office of 8 years of all this crazy impact in our county in San Diego. And I I honestly wanted to share a story actually about my son. And many of you've, actually I haven't really posted too much about it. Many of you listen to the podcast and many of you may know what's going on with him. But a couple weeks ago, or maybe a couple months ago now, we started to realize that maybe he couldn't see. And it was a sobering experience because it's me, right? Just like all of you. We're experts at optimal development. We're experts at seeing kids literally normalize this vibrancy. And I was baffled because my child is on point or ahead, as many of our kids are in every aspect. But I wasn't sure that he could see me. I know he hasn't seen his sister. I know he hasn't really stared and gazed at his mom while nursing. And none of the moves that we've had to make really made sense. We moved Escondido 25 miles, or 25 miles from our current home. We're moving our practice 30 miles. And we're very blessed and grateful that probably 85% or more are actually coming with us. And it's a vote to everything that we do, but also we collectively do, how much we connect with people. But none of it really made sense as I was looking for spaces and things like that until my son. And I recognized one of my coaches asked me the question, why haven't you looked? You're moving to Escondido. Why aren't you looking in Escondido? And I said, it's too far. And he said, for whom? And he's like, I've been your coach for 8 years and you've never once considered yourself and your family. And he didn't know about my son at the time. And so the long and short of it is we started to realize that without knowing who or what our son could see, we didn't know necessarily where to go. And I started to recognize the end of my scope. When you take care of people like we do, and you take care of the most chronic cases like we do, it's wild to experience that. And we went to two pediatricians, very health freedom oriented, very amazing pediatricians. Went to two other chiropractors, one who is 35 years in practice, and told me that the day we brought my son in was the saddest day of her practice because she didn't know either. We went to two, now three developmental and behavioral optometrists, one of whom referred us to UCSD, the big state-funded university hospital here in San Diego. And I just said, we got to go check it out, right? Two pediatric ophthalmologists and one essentially, in my opinion, I don't remember the last time I picked up an ophthalmoscope, but I did for my son, and my skills were better than hers, and I was super pissed because she triggered the F out of my kid and triggered the F out of my wife. And in the end, she said, we need to put your son under and do an exam under anesthesia and do a brain MRI, because what we're seeing more than likely is a brain or genetic disorder that is going to be a lifetime of delays. And I sat back, and that was the one thing that triggered me to get into like clinical mode. And I asked her an immediate question, and I said, what delays would you see and identify in my son today at 4.5 months back then that would indicate he would be delayed for life? And she, gave the age-old medical doctor statement of, well, it's really hard to tell at this age what these kids might be experiencing. And I said, no, it's not hard to tell at this age, because this is what I do. And I'm sorry, but we're going for a second opinion. And at the end of the day, I looked over my wife, and she was bawling because it was her deepest seated fear, but she's not me and she's not you. And I stood in my conviction in that moment because I recognized the gap. And my medical doctor friends, well, she shouldn't know. That's more of a pediatric neurologist. I was like, hell no. If somebody's going to give that type of prognosis and put my kid under, and I asked a further question, get this one. I said, shouldn't we wait until his moral reflex integrates so he has homeostasis in his autonomic nervous system before we decide to put him under by shutting him down with a drug that will shut down his nervous system? Do you think we should consider that? And she had no idea how to answer that question. And the reason why this is important is all of our prayers, and I do say prayers, and I am not a religious man, over the last several weeks was to find an optometric version of you, an ICPA chiropractor. An optometric version of somebody who will say, I am going to look for the most optimal version of what's going on in your kid. I'm going to do what I can to express that in the most effective way that sustains not only him in this moment, but potentially set him up for generations, hopefully, right, of optimal health. And we found this optometrist who in the moment, just said, tell us what you have experienced. Tell us what the other doctor said. Him and his two externs sitting behind him, one a fourth-year med student, one a fourth-year optometry student. And he did an exam that my son seemed to want to do. Odd, right? Like we do when we see babies. And he performs this expert exam and he goes to the back and he goes, hey, let's go. Let's go to this other room. Takes us through his office. By the way, his office says, happy birthday, Dr. Valenti, 2002. Like cork boards, super old, dated, reminds me of like an old school chiropractor. He's in his 70s. And in the end, he takes my son, flips on a projector, plays a black and white DVD that has classical music, and he just carries my son to the front of the room where it's projecting. And at some point, my son does this. And he says, not only can your son see, he wants to. And the reason why they scheduled this appointment for me was because I said, my son needs to see. He has a visual deficiency in his nervous system. And once he gets that fulfillment of that neurology, his entire nervous system is going to come on. And in that moment, I saw my son's entire extensor profile come on. His vestibular system, his visual system, his proprioceptive system, all locked in that moment. And he said, it's going to be 15 weeks, weekly vision therapy. It's cash only. And I said, when do we start? And I said, can we come twice a week? Can we come more often? And he said, more is always better for the nervous system. I was like, holy hell, right? Not more meaning always intense, but more stimulus. We're about 6 weeks in and my son is excelling, they say. And not only can he he's got little cute glasses now too. They got glasses. He needs two things, they say. He says he needs to see a clear picture, because if he doesn't see a clear picture, this was my priority. If he doesn't see a clear picture at this stage, that pathway from his eyes to his occipital lobe and his visual cortex doesn't train his brain to see a clear picture. And essentially, two other optometrists told me that it leads to a condition of like an amblyopia state where his brain never actually learns. He'll have the anatomy to see, but he actually won't be able to see. And so the medical pediatric ophthalmologist saying that my kid's delays were more important, the brain MRI and the genetic disorder was more important than his vision, couldn't be further from the truth, right? So I shared this story with you guys because this is health freedom to me. Health freedom isn't just the inalienable rights and the personal sovereignty and the body autonomy, which is what you probably thought you were going to hear from me. But it's also normalizing vibrant health for life. Every bit of conviction that I've had over the last 3 years, which is literally, I believe, standing on the shoulders of amazing people like Stanton Hom, who I have no career and no professional aspect of my life without. It's normalizing vibrant health for life, for that person, but for all generations to come, all foreseeable generations. I have 3 principles for you, and I know I might be short on time, but I want you to know, and I don't use this word lightly because I've actually been to war, but I want you to know that we are at war. And I want you to know that being somebody who's been deployed, who's been in combat, who actually has documented PTSD from said combat, that I've fought harder for the last 3 years than I have ever in the history of my entire military experience, which was 12 years total in my life. And I sat back and a part of me was like, did I fuck up my kid? Did I fight too hard? Did I build too much stress? Because my wife did miscarry after somebody who shed in our home and then immediately conceived afterwards, like most of our families do, right? And was it something that I did? And then I sat back and I said, would I rather have a son that is free and blind? Or would I rather have a son who's enslaved and can see? And it was such a sobering moment for me because I had to really, really sit back and think about it because I want my son to see. And I couldn't come to the conclusion that freedom was ever on the table, that freedom could ever be compromised. But that war word might make you feel uncomfortable. But I made this similar speech to Jim Gale and the Food Forest Abundance guys. And I said, we're not fighting with freaking bullets, man. We're not fighting with artillery, which is what I was, an artilleryman. For the farmers, it's regenerative farming. They need to seize that land. For us, it's innate truth and love. And at the end of the day, if you haven't stepped into the force that you are as a human being on a planet in such a time as this, like my son and my daughter, Alana, whose name means awakening, and Luca, whose name means light, that if you don't recognize that that is now the weaponry, maybe I need to change lexicon, and you aren't fighting every damn day with that innate truth and love, then what are you doing? Principle number 2 is love with your whole heart. Think with your whole mind and speak with your whole voice. Many of us have been duped. We've been duped into thinking that love is rainbows and puppy dogs. We've been duped into thinking that our voice must always be kind. I've been taught that the whole picture of love is actually recognizing that it is that warm hug. It is that depth of just compassion and kindness that everybody who's ever met me knows that is my comfort zone. But it's also a swift kick in the ass sometimes. And it's a swift kick in the ass, not only to sometimes your parents, sometimes your patients, sometimes your politicians. It is a swift kick in the ass sometimes because at the end of the day, we are living with half our minds and half our hearts and half our voices. The last principle is, and maybe my buddy Dan Bronstein shared this because I gave him this quote when I wasn't sure I was going to be able to speak. But BJ said, if you're not willing to let them die on the table, don't expect to raise the dead. If you're not willing to let them die on your table, don't expect to raise the dead. If you haven't seen the all-cause mortality increase, if you haven't seen the increases on every single chronic cardiovascular neurological issue, if you haven't seen that and recognize that those people are going to be coming into our offices and you're not ready to step into the conversation, which I have been blessed to interview so many vaccine injured, whatever, shot injured people over the last 2 years. And what I'm hearing is not only a denial from the medical system, not only a passing the buck in the medical system, I'm hearing the worst cases of discrimination, the worst cases of medical terrorism, in my opinion, that I've ever actually experienced in my career. Which leads me to the second half of this last principle is if you're not willing to tell the whole truth, don't expect to change the world. If you're not willing to tell the whole truth, do not expect to change the world. I feel like I've been blessed to be able to see the landscape. When I gave a speech at the Health Freedom for Humanity Symposium last year, people came off, when I came off the stage, people were they were literally bawling on one end. At two, they said, I feel like I understand what's going on. I don't know if we're able to share that graphic. If not, just shoot me an email, shoot me a DM or something. But I wanted to gift you guys a health freedom reclamation course that I taught. It's a 5-part series that has 5 principles of everything that I've tried to just collate over the last 3 years of craziness. And I've wanted to leave that with you because I can't get it all in 20 minutes. And I honestly know at the end of the day, many of you, just like I am every day, it is not just so I've fought harder than I ever have in deployment, but I've studied harder than I ever have. And you all know like how long we have put in so much effort. And this course is one of the things that I've loved doing and creating because it was for our community. And all I really want people to understand, all I want them to do is be able to understand. And the last thing I have for you, because I know I'm pretty much out of time, is they aren't after us. They're after our kids. But the deepest truth is innate, is what they are after. Never in the history of chiropractic has chiropractic been more important. Never in the history of the world has chiropractic been more important. I'm eternally grateful for being here. I feel very, very blessed, and I'm so sorry I wasn't there. But at the end of the day, I mean, my kid's crying right now, so I got to go get her. But I love you guys. I appreciate you guys. And I hope this inspires you to do an even greater, make a greater impact in the history of your career than you ever have. I appreciate y'all.
Thank you, Dr. Stanton Hom, live. You can see what fighting from the context of love looks like, right? Not fighting for the sake of fighting, but from just this deep sense of love and the work that we have cut out for us. And it's actually a good transition to this next speaker who embodies love. This person, actually, first off, how awesome has been like AV, lights, the setup, the screens, all of that. The only reason that Rando is able to do what he does is because he has a badass chiropractic wife who keeps him in check. The only reason. A few years ago, I was doing a talk, and I made a comment that a well-adjusted pregnancy should not be one filled with pain and discomfort. And this person came up to me a couple months ago after the birth of her son, who you've probably seen around here,